and good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you, everyone, for taking time this afternoon to join us here at the National Office to talk about this very exciting time that we're in. We have before us an election in about 7 days, or is it 7 days? And we are anticipating that with a new administration, whether it is the Obama administration or a Mitt Romney administration, that this presents a new transition, a new opportunity for us to present a policy agenda for the 2013 congressional cycle, or more importantly, the administration cycle. So we want to take today's session, 90 minutes of discussion, to talk about how we actually present, how we develop and present our new Emerald City's policy agenda. We should recognize and remember that many of us weren't even here, but we were born out of the 2008 election. And we went to the hot White House and we presented to the administration, the new administration at that time, a vision for how to rebuild America and to do it in a way that was protecting and strengthening our environment, that was indeed growing and investing in high-wage jobs and business opportunities, and that would also ensure social equity. Well, 4 years hence, I think we've got a lot to say. And the question is, what is it that we want to present to the new administration? The importance of today's session is to figure out how we begin to elevate this discussion and to bring it, voices from the field, to Washington, D.C. You may or may not know, but everyone, every policy wonk, every research institute is doing the same thing. Everyone is trying to prepare the first 100-day strategy, the first 200-day strategy, the next congressional agenda for the 113th Congress, and the next policy stance for the administration. So whether it's the Brookings Institution or the Center for American Progress, many of our partners, the Policy Link and Youth Build, the building trades, are all in the same positioning of figuring out what next. So this is an opportunity for all of us, and I think what's extremely important is you and the work that you have been able to do over the last 4 years. Unlike these other organizations that are looking at the issues from a 30,000-foot level, you're able to really put a spin on the needs, the opportunities, the challenges from a grassroots, ground-level operation. That is going to be extremely unique in terms of what's going to be available for people to look at and to respond to here in Washington, D.C. There's very few, if any, organizations that can take this from operational experience and develop a policy agenda which says, been there, done that, and this is where we need to go from here. You're critical to this, and so what we're going to be talking about today is how to begin to frame a policy agenda, that will result in a white paper that we can begin to bring to the decision makers for the next several years. One of the, I think the sort of the big picture is that very few people would have recognized 4 years ago that building an alternative energy sector would be as tough as it was, or as tough as it is. Very few people would have even felt that Emerald City's vision would have legs. And you have proven to them that it has legs, it has value, this notion of investing in local capacity, multi-stakeholder coalitions, that we can do triple bottom line work. We're still in this business, and we're actually doing well in this business, notwithstanding the challenges. So what we want to do is to get you to figure out what the aha moments were, what the surprises were, what the challenges are, and what we need to do to really realize the vision, which I don't think has changed whatsoever. I think if you look at what's going on in the political discourse that we're having right now, there's several things that are very important we are the living proof of its importance. One is people are concerned about energy policy. Are we going to do coal? Are we going to do renewables? I mean, that's the forefront of the political discourse. The other issue is obviously jobs and economic development. And the third is the extent to which democracy has value and the role of the Constitution in civil liberties and the rights of women and the role of government in society. This really represents the Emerald City's footprint. And so we have a lot to say, a lot to offer about how to really shape our future. So today, I just want to thank you for being engaged in this work and to excite you about the opportunities of starting again, rebooting and positioning your work and having new voices and new ideas presented for how we can actually scale up and accelerate what we've been doing. So at this point, what I'd like to do is to have Felipe talk to you about what to expect in today's webinar and what we're looking to do when we bring you to Washington, D.C. in the next couple of weeks. Felipe.
Thanks for joining us. So, as Denise mentioned, it's very, very important to really set the stage and the conversation based on your leadership in terms of what you're doing in your cities and counties. And so it's very unique because, you know, there are spin doctors and pundits and policy wonks throughout Washington that are basically planning a session that really doesn't include local voices. So at Pew Charitable Trust on December the 5th, we're going to really depend on your insight and what your local council and fellow citizens in your cities and counties feel about the election, because it's going to be a post-election conversation, and it's going to be from the ground level up, from outside the Washington Beltway. So what I want to do is just basically go through the agenda for December the 5th really quickly, and then we'll have Rosie Sherman from MIT CoLab go through the process of when you have a meeting post-election with your local council, what to ask, how to capture that. So when you come to Washington on December 5th for the post-election convening, that we're all speaking from the same script in terms of what is going on in your cities and counties. So just very quickly, December 5th is divided into two sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session. So in the morning, it's going to be all of you from all our locals with our board members. And we're going to start with a conversation. So should I do an announcement? Okay. So if you have problems getting on, the password when you link into WebEx, the password is the present year, 2012. So in the morning, it's going to be you as leaders in our respective cities and our board members. And we're going to have a conversation starting with you. And it's going to be what are the voices from the field? What have your council members said about the elections and the outcome in terms of, as we move forward, what overarching policies should the White House adopt? And as Denise said, we had a full plate 4 years ago. We anticipated, we put together 12 bills. None of the bills flew. They were all defeated, or they were marked up and, you know, they died in the House or the Senate. And then we had a lot of prospects for federal funding, which really dried up. So moving forward, we want to hear what local folks feel the president should do to promote clean energy and a green economy. Secondly, we want to know what has happened back home in terms of your local city and county, in terms of opportunities that might have been available and not enough information or marketing from federal agencies were there or from other intermediaries to really push those opportunities. What you may have seen as some of the best practices out in the field and in your city and counties. And then beyond that, what are the barriers? How does the federal bureaucracy step in the way of progress and moving forward? And then we want to talk about what should the president do to direct his federal agencies to be proactive and move a proactive agenda. And then secondly, what should your members and part of your delegation, congressional delegation, do and promote in terms of legislation? So that will be the morning. We'll have a time where we'll network over lunch. And then in the afternoon, we're going to invite 3 groups in, and we're going to discuss with them our take, how we feel about a national platform. And the first group will be think tanks, some of the leading think tanks and policy centers inside the Washington Beltway. The second will be officials from the Obama administration, from several federal agencies. And then the third will be Capitol Hill staff. And everything's going to be recorded. We're going to do a transcript, and then we're going to put together a white paper. And that white paper will be the banner for our national platform in moving forward over the next 4 years. It will be submitted to the White House, and it will be submitted to the new Congress. So that's basically why December 5th is really important. Additionally, what's very important is the synergy, and Rosie will go through the process. When you meet post-election with your local council and other informants that are there from your cities and counties that you want to invite to your post-election meeting, to really capture the pulse of how people are feeling locally. The white paper is an exercise, but more importantly, it's a way to really submit so that we could be on the radar screen over the first 100 to 200 days with the White House and the new Congress. So that's basically it. I'm going to turn everything over to Rosie that's going to go through the process. But before I do so, I just want to stress just one other item. So on November 15th, as you have seen in terms of your emails, there's going to be a national call to action. And starting tomorrow, the White House will be calling your mayors, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors will be calling your mayors and urging your mayor to, on November 15th, to hold a press conference to mention this call to action during any public event that the mayor, that he or she may be having on November 15th, and or submit an op-ed page to the local newspaper, do a radio interview, anything to really make public Emerald City's and our will to ensure that during the sequester process that Congress is going to be going through post-Thanksgiving up to the end of December, that we do not inflict serious cuts on federal job training programs. You heard from Save Our Skills Alliance and from Rachel last month on how cuts can top almost 20% of all federal job training programs at the Department of Labor and other agencies. So it's important that our mayors are behind us to ensure that those cuts do not go that deep. Because as a reality in the sequester process, there will be cuts in terms of domestic programming. We're hoping that the cuts will be the mandatory 5 to 7%, which will be hard to live with, but you really cannot fathom what it would be if there were percents up to 20% based on 2010 funding levels. So I just wanted to make sure, and again, for this event, you're just building this relationship with your mayor. You're not building an event. You want to build it into his or her schedule to make sure that in your city that the word gets out in terms of saving of drastic cuts. So what I'll do now is basically have Rosie Sherman come on from MIT CoLab to go through the process and how do we move from here to prepare for December the 5th.
Great. Thank you
Sure.
so much,
And
Felipe.
Denise reminded me we'll have Q&A at the end.
Can everybody hear me?
If anybody's still trying to get onto the WebEx system, just want to announce again the password is 2012. Rosie, do you have a webcam?
You know, I have a camera now. This all just pulled out. I'm trying to share it so you all can see my face, but it's saying that it's not installed properly, which I don't really know what to say. It's embedded in my laptop.
Are you clicking on the camera icon next to your name?
Sorry?
Did you click on the camera icon next to your name in the right-hand panel?
Yes, I
Okay.
did.
Okay. No, it's fine, though. We can still see your presentation.
Okay, I don't know now why this keeps popping out. Can you see the screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I apologize, everyone, that I guess my camera wasn't prepared. But please pipe up as I go through this. As Felipe mentioned, I'm doing this work on behalf of MIT's Community Innovators Lab, and I have a colleague that's working with me, Brendan McEwan. I don't know if he made it onto the call, but he is also with CoLab and is the project director for an initiative called the Green Economic Development Initiative, which shares quite a bit of goals with Emerald Cities. And what I've done, which Felipe has just described, is to try to put together a very broad template for you all to use. Brendan and I sort of went through, I guess, what Felipe and Taylor would call the policy wonk version of this and tried to think how to best present it to you. And we decided, since this was really meant to be a grassroots reflection of your experiences, we wanted to do something pretty simple. So I'll go through it very quickly, and then what I'd love to do is to go back to the beginning and get your input, because without starting to getting to know you better and understanding how you see these meetings going with your local councils, that will help me make this template a bit more detailed and a bit more robust, so that you all have a really kind of thorough, detailed script that you can use. So why don't I go ahead and start? Okay, so right, this is just repeating what Felipe has essentially just said, and that the point of this template is to create a script, but ultimately when you fill in that script during these meetings, what we should have as a result is a succinct and articulate statement from each of the directors about how they believe federal policy will best help serve their goals. And that way, on December 5th, that will be a unified message. This is more of the same. Okay, so the way we thought we would start doing this is to have you all describe the conditions you face on the ground, including where you see opportunities for movement and barriers you currently face. And we ask you to sort of fill in what those conditions are underneath 4 categories. So the first category is stimulating demand. That could be stimulating demand for efficiency retrofits, stimulating demand for job creation, for training. This is an open question. So how do you create the demand side of the equation? Next, not surprisingly, how do you develop the supply side capacity? What are the conditions you face in terms of, creating enough jobs, creating enough projects that fill a pipeline? The third has to do with what conditions you faced in providing job opportunities to disadvantaged communities, And this sort of goes hand in hand with the fourth category we did, which was process generally. But Felipe and I think everyone was particularly interested in the process toward creating high road jobs and getting traditional labor and these communities to work together. So that was sort of the first brainstorming we wanted you to do yourselves and with your local councils. And then we wanted you to sort of take a moment to internalize those experiences, what the conditions are on the ground, and try to link it to the three components of federal policy that Felipe mentioned. And those are the president, him or herself, what they can do, federal agencies, and then Congress. And there are other ways we could break that down, but I'd like that to be a conversation. And as a way of helping you sort of think about that in a bit more detailed way, we wanted you to try to articulate what each of these sort of components could do. So what can the president do in terms of policies that he is advocating for or direct actions to promote energy efficiency and jobs? And then what policies and programs should the president be directing federal agencies to adopt or to continue? And I think a lot of you probably have experience in this realm with, for example, financing programs that have gone through the Department of Energy or the Economic Development Authority. And then finally, what legislation should the president ask Congress to enact to promote clean energy efficiency and job creation? And then we just put up a slide with some of these kind of policy wonk topics that are being talked about a lot. And these, we didn't separate these by president, Congress, federal agencies, but you can sort of see from the list where those might fall. And that's it. So originally, I think before the hurricane, I had hoped that you all could take a really quick look at this very simple template, and fill it in, and then you all would be doing the sharing today. So I understand that you haven't filled it in, which is absolutely fine. But what I hope we can do now during this time is for you guys to just have a conversation and give me some of your just initial reactions to this. And Taylor's recording, so I'll use this session to take notes, and then I will resend you this template, probably in text form, like a Word document, so that you'll all have a sort of more detailed script to take with you during your meetings. So I hope that made sense. I don't know, Taylor, how you usually do these calls when there are so many people on the line, but if you wanted to facilitate, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. So everybody kind of already knows the deal. If you have any questions, you can speak up. I'm also going to be on the chat feature, which you can use if for some reason you aren't on the phone. So yeah, open it up if anybody has any questions for Rosie.
And I'm going to be taking notes. I think you all can see that, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'll jump in. Steve in Seattle.
Hi, Steve.
So gave this a little bit of thought, and from what Felipe said earlier, the desire to sort of inform federal policy from the local level, it just seems to me that there's some benefit of being fairly specific about what programs and projects we believe we can deliver at the local level, what we have in work now or on the drawing board, and what support we need specifically from the federal level to enhance those opportunities, remove barriers, and so on.
Right.
So I don't know how, but there might be an opportunity for specifics that, as Felipe said, you wouldn't get from sort of national policy centers and so on.
Sure.
Each city is quite different in my experience what we're working. Not somewhat different
That's
what we're
right.
working on. Some common ground, obviously.
Sure.
So, Steve, this is Denise, and I really think it's an excellent point, which is where to start, and that is to talk about we want to give evidence that that there's work underway, that there's been progress, that there have been some successes, and you being able to identify what those successes are, and then of course, then going into the challenges. But yeah, having a clear sense of what your footprint is would be a substantial opening for any conversation. Some of you are working with county government, some of them you are working with the downtown business community. So all of that really will represent sort of the diversity of opportunities that we want to present.
Great. Thank you, Denise.
This is Avni from San Francisco. Rose, I have a question about what you just laid out.
Sure.
I'm trying to grasp it from a local perspective. I mean, it makes complete sense to me at a broad level, but in terms of getting our input on it, it would be it would make it easier for us to provide input if you identify, the last slide you had like
Sure.
a bunch of strategies or just buzzwords.
Mm-hmm.
It would make sense if you could unravel that for us and say, here are the 3 strategies we could deploy, go on the policy track, go on I just don't know, or the legislation track, or,
Mm-hmm.
It's not clear to me at the local level what would be the most effective way of delivering on energy efficiency goals.
Okay.
It would help if you could provide us with, a few examples of what would work effectively based on.
Okay. Sure.
I mean, I feel like throwing that completely on the local perspective, I don't know what you'll get. I mean, I'm not sure I'm in a position to tell you that we should enact legislation to,
Yeah.
fund energy efficiency.
Sure.
I mean, so does that make sense? It's not really a question, but I'm trying to.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. Let me allow more people to give me sort of initial thoughts and questions, and then I'll respond to some of these. I mean, they're all really good points.
Sure.
This is Casey from Portland. I just want to support Avni's comment, and I think that being more specific about some examples of things that could happen at the federal level would help us to guide more concrete and practical discussions at the local level, because I think we can come up with some ideas locally that may have ties to federal policy but may not. So just backing Avni up on that.
Okay. Are there any other initial thoughts? Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in again. Sorry, Steve Gelb here.
No, sure. No problem.
Now, I think we as a group of local directors and as Emerald Cities need to present kind of a framework for how we think energy efficiency in our cities can work, and then so not just specific programs we're doing, but what are the common links? So we've been giving some thought to this in Seattle. So I think one thing to let everyone know, and I think we can all agree that implementing these kinds of programs has been slower and harder than we all thought, but to reinforce that it is happening, and instead of taking 6 months or a year, it took 2 or 3 years, and now we're starting to get real results. But the framework I'm talking about, we're zeroing in on, so what are the components necessary to launch a program, regardless of sector, city, and so on. So elements such as, motivation, what motivates building owners, city officials, whoever is implementing the projects. What are the economics of the projects, and does it pay for itself for that whatever entity is? what resources are necessary to make it happen, both in terms of workforce as well as financial resources, and then what are the policies for equitable delivery of the program. And I'm not sure those are the final ones, but if we came to this event and said, here are the elements that it takes to run these programs, and then and say, and some of the elements there's local responsibility to deliver, and some the state and some federal can help deliver those things.
Right.
So it might be a framework for discussion, or for showing that we know exactly what we want to do, and we just need to fill some gaps with federal support or funding, legislation, whatever, really unleash the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Okay,
So
well, let me.
If I could sort of throw out some ideas, listening to the last couple of comments. This is Denise. You've got a couple of buckets: the demand, the supply. I can't remember the other ones, but I think what's being asked, and let me see if I'm just clear about this, that we need at least some smaller buckets. Not to say that we're going to have a checklist, but because I think it should still be open-ended enough so that the local councils can have their own identity in this conversation. But when we think about demand here in Washington, there's just a couple of things, like the thing that's going to create people who want to retrofit their buildings is financing. They're going to need some policy levers, which means that there's either a stick or an incentive that makes them do it. Then in the demand bucket would also be what it takes to actually aggregate the buildings, to get the building inventory. And so, that's more level of specificity, but still broad enough that you can, if you had these three things, we could really go with it. But it gives you some sense of how to do it and have that conversation locally. Similarly, on the supply side, it's really, we need workforce training. I think what supply side means is, how do you get jobs for folks in this energy efficiency space? And that means that you have to address, the conditions of workers, worker needs. You need and a workforce infrastructure that is attuned to this sector. So is that the kind of sort of sub issues that you would like us to break out?
Yeah. Well, I think what you and Steve are hitting on is exactly correct. I mean, we took a first shot at trying to come up with, I think buckets is a great word, something that was broad enough where it wouldn't constrain any of the sort of specific experiences you all have had locally. And I didn't add this as a note in this template, Steve, but you're exactly right. I mean, I think specific stories and cases, whether it's a once-off project or a program you guys are working on, is essential, and that should be included. In terms of sort of giving you more of a sense of what's possible at the federal policy level, I think this is a discussion maybe where we can bring Felipe in. I think originally the thought process was we wanted to give you all some sort of framework to do what you've basically just said, whether that's talking about what you need on the demand and supply side, or whether that's, I don't know if I am understanding you correctly, Steve, but sort of illustrating the frameworks that you all are using, or creating some kind of, ecosystem where you illustrate who all the stakeholders are and what their roles are, where they've seen opportunities and what they've accomplished, and where they're still meeting obstacles, and then sort of take all that information and then link it to federal policy as a second step and say, okay, given that this is how it's working on the ground, where is it appropriate for the federal government to step in and fill gaps? I think originally that was Felipe's thought, because he wanted the focus to really be on your stories and to not constrain you all or lead you in just a specific direction because we think, oh, well, maybe the federal government will pass this specific legislation in the next 4 years, and how would that affect you? But I definitely have blocked time off in the next month to help you all think through some of these things. So maybe what the best thing to do would be is to hone exactly how we want you all to sort of present what's going on in your cities, and then for me to try to help you translate that into some specific federal policy actions that, Emerald Cities Collaborative has probably already been working on, because they have a task force that looks at really specific issues. For example, financing for energy efficiency. There's been a lot of federal financing that has trickled down to a lot of your projects. There are some specific financial instruments and tools that may sunset or could be extended. So those are examples of, specific things that could have an impact ultimately on the programs and projects you all have already started and the ones that you will start in the future.
Let me chime in. This is Felipe. So, we can't, from the record, based on the legislation that we wanted to pass and based on the federal programs that we wanted funding, it just didn't happen. And we do know that the outcome of the election will not be a majority House and Senate in terms of any party. So let me say that over the last 4 years, there was a demonstration which has become a national program legislatively and at the Department of Education, and that's the Harlem Children's Zone. So this is a local program with clear policies on how to educate our kids that has really driven national legislation and national federal funding. So in each of your cities, you have something that your member of Congress in your zip code can adopt. And, the whole idea of starting outside of the Washington Beltway is understanding that the leadership in part will be with us. So, we can't depend on national legislation at this point, nor can we depend on leading federal programs. I'm not saying that we won't, over the next 4 years, pass a clean energy bill, but everything has to be local, and everything is being driven local because, Washington, D.C. is broken. It just doesn't work. So, at this point, even when you're involved November 15th with saving federal job training programs, it's an action which is defensive. It's not offensive. So we're defending what we have and things that we will create, and we've done it in cities over the last 40 years with empowerment zones and enterprise communities and child care. It's all going to be based on the thoughts that you have. And none of your thoughts or none of the thoughts of folks on your local council are small-minded. These are all thoughts that the next time when we go to the Hill to visit members, it's going to be based on what we think is good for our cities and counties.
Yeah, that's great, Felipe. And I think, Denise, some of the thoughts that you were sharing earlier, just starting to respond to this idea of how you would aggregate demand or how you would aggregate supply. And you started saying, okay, we need financing, we need policy levers, we need a way to aggregate buildings, maybe you need better data on buildings in your city. I think that kind of thought process or that brainstorming is really what we want you all to do individually and with your councils in the next few weeks. And we just need to find the right way of framing that you all feel comfortable with. And that can be what I've put forward here, or definitely something like what Steve has suggested. And then I think the next step is to say, after you have a pretty good map of this is what we've accomplished, this is what we are still having trouble with, and this is what we think we need. This is where we see opportunities. then you can start a conversation about, quote unquote, what you want the federal government to do. And I can certainly help to do that. But I definitely agree with Felipe, and I think my role is not to, adulterate that by, telling you this is what's important at the federal level. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, what I liked about what Felipe said was that what it brings to my mind is figure out what you need to blow out your program. What is it going to take for you to have a smashing success? And some of that might not, and particularly since it will be hard to get any money out of whatever administration comes, it may not require money. Even though financing would be one of it, it might be, convene the CEOs of every major financial institution in the United States and develop, their capacity to engage in this work. Get community development financial institutions providing money for energy efficiency. Come and stump and have a big, the president meet with all of the governors. I mean, it could be, just what it takes to just push your work to the next level with the diverse community that's needed to be engaged in this. Do something with the business community in a different way. So none of this has to be big deal policy stuff like carbon, reductions, tax credits or whatever. But it could be the small influential work about getting the market to work in a better way. Data, I think you just mentioned about data collection or what have you.
It seems to me that realistically all of us at the local level aren't counting on anything from the federal level. If we're realistic. So we're all implementing plans to move forward, and some are having a lot of success locally.
Right.
So I wonder if we don't sort of each try to focus on, one or two of our major initiatives, kind of like case studies, and then, make some decision nationally, how do we present them? So, we can present, I don't think we would present them all, but, here are 3, 4, 5 different strategies or sectors or programs that are working in different parts of the United States to implement energy efficiency and job creation programs, and use that as kind of the backdrop. And then within each one, what is needed, and then maybe what's in common. So what can either on a small scale or a specific level, like Denise was mentioning, or if there anything that be more general concerns, they rise up.
What does everyone else think of that idea?
Maybe I'll throw out some specifics and see if it makes more sense. So, the work being done in San Francisco and Oakland around community colleges. So that's sort of, a case study. Here's the program. Here's what's working. Here's what's needed. Here are some of the barriers that remain. I know Casey's done some work in Portland, working with federal buildings. So that might be another one. Here in Seattle, we're trying to work with large commercial buildings or with multifamily buildings. Atlanta, I think they're working large commercial buildings as well. So, and I don't know all the specifics, but if we had 4 or 5 of those kind of general targets, and present where we're having some success, and that we're ready to go locally, but we need some support.
Right.
I like that idea of the case study, but this is Avni. But it would also be useful for each council to be able to provide feedback across sectors. So, if we are working on a community college initiative, but we're also pursuing a public housing or a multifamily housing or other sector strategy, and what are the challenges within those sectors, I think that would be useful. On-bill repayment and multifamily housing is a huge barrier to accomplishing anything. So getting the utilities to enable that, or getting federal pressure to enable that with the utilities would be really useful. So, I mean, I think that a lot of us have learned a lot across sectors over the last 2 years, and it would be good to have a way for us to provide that feedback in a finite way.
Well,
a case study is one way to do that, but maybe a sort of a matrix by sector.
I think a matrix is a great idea, and another option that Brendan and I had discussed, well, two options rather, and these could go hand in hand as a matrix. It's just a bit more detailed than supply, demand, and process. So the first would be to try to break out the work you do into quote unquote sectors that I think you all do interface with. So buildings, job training and education, and maybe utilities and policy, and then data, I guess, could be a fourth, and allow you to populate those kinds of topics depending on the sorts of projects you're running. And you could use case studies to do that, to illustrate what you've accomplished, what is needed, as Steve said. And then we could sort of utilize that matrix to discover what you all do have in common. The other thing that I think Steve mentioned that is maybe quite important, especially as you have these council meetings, is to understand the different roles or sort of the sectors of people or leadership organizations. And that could be mayors, county governments, state governments, academic institutions, and training centers. Because each of these groups, labor groups, they probably also have their own ideas about where they've had some kind of connection with federal policy. They might be helping you to interact these programs, but as Felipe said, if there's a change in national legislation or policy, they might no longer be able to help you in the same capacity that they have been. So I do think it's important through this process for us all to learn not only what maybe more the federal government could do, which, as you all said, your hopes are pretty low for that, but also what we really need the federal government to continue doing or to not desist with, because that would change this landscape tremendously, and obviously the call to action is part of that. So does that sort of matrix make maybe a bit more sense? Kind of topics on one side, people or institutions on the other, and then you utilize your own experiences to sort of populate that kind of a matrix.
I like that.
This is Kate.
I guess one thing I would suggest, and where I differ a little bit of what was presented earlier, from our perspective, I think demand creation is everything, and that I think what we're realizing, if we don't have a demand for energy efficiency, then we don't have any jobs, and we don't need any training, and and nothing else happens. So I think we should. I would look at all of it starting from how do we create demand for the work itself, and then the job training and equity and everything falls underneath that, rather than having sort of equal footing, because training programs without jobs doesn't do any good.
Well, let me push back a little bit on that, Steve. This is Denise, and that is, I think what I'm seeing you guys all struggle with in your particular places, some less so than others, is sort of this larger issue of the role of labor in our work, importance of collective bargaining and project labor agreements and community workforce agreements, and that's a huge piece of work that's actually is making it even difficult for us to sell our brand, because there's a strong anti-union sentiment nationwide. And I agree that none of this even matters if there's no job creation, but I would think that's a very important close second issue that we should put on the table about what we need to do about this to bring a better sensibility to this, that piece of creating a middle class that can afford to send their kids to school or retrofit their houses.
This is Avni. I totally support your point, Denise. I do think that if we could elaborate on the whole labor community relationship piece, because that's a constant tension in our everyday work, as it traditionally exists, as well as how can we really innovate on that. Because I was at City College's Sustainability Committee the other day, and they were basically asking me questions about, how energy efficiency is actually green, or how is it a green job? And I said, well, it reduces the carbon footprint. But they said, well, what about living roofs, or what about, how about an actual innovation in the training itself and the description of what we're doing, just the content of it also. She's like, could we create training around, how to make living roofs or, something that we haven't really looked at yet, because we're very much in the traditional construction sectors, but something to maybe brainstorm about down the line.
Yeah, this is Casey. I'd like to pick up on that point, too. We work a lot with Clean Energy Works Oregon, who does the on-bill repayment methods for single-family homes, and they've been working for the last couple of years to try to put together a green apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship program at the state level, and have hit a lot of barriers where they're running into silos of work that have traditionally gone to specific trade unions. And so, how do we work with unions to create flexibility in their system where appropriate?
Exactly.
Okay, well, so it sounds like of this original template, is this still up on everyone's screens, by the way? Or
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this slide that I'm on now in terms of process, traditional labor and community, this is striking a chord with you all, and then stimulating demand is striking a chord. So these are things you all want to keep as sort of touchstone topics to be brainstorming with your councils.
Yeah, I would say I'm not inclined to get rid of any of them. I do think creating demand is pretty central, but I wouldn't eliminate the other categories. So just a quick question for Felipe, and maybe I'm harping on this too much, but I'm just imagining, facilitating this discussion with my local council, and wondering if it wouldn't be helpful to get a 1 or 2 pager on sort of what policies, programs, legislation has Emerald Cities pushed for at the national level over the last 2 years, recognizing that they may be dead in the water and a non-issue, but just as sort of an example of the types of things that we can push for that we can then tie to those local activities. And I'm just speaking as somebody who's never, worked on Capitol Hill. I'm not as tied into the national processes and leadership and all of that as you folks are. So it might just be helpful to be able to, at least pull from that document during the discussion if we hit a dead end on how to tie local activities to national policy.
Sure. So what we'll do is when Rosie sends her matrix or template, we'll also have we'll list some of the national legislation that we pushed, as well as some pushes for changes in federal regulations. So then people can really identify with something specific.
That would be great.
I would go a step further. We talked a lot about being defensive. So, is there a list of federal policies, funding, programs that exist today that are either directly or indirectly supporting the work we do that we want to be sure we protect? And or enhance, rather than sort of, new big initiatives, kind of small continuations, protection, make things more efficient, remove, a lot of what I've heard, a lot of the federal dollars and programs come with so many requirements and obstacles that makes it really difficult to use the funds. So stuff like that, that's maybe smaller scale, but gives us that laundry list we can look at to jog our local council's interest.
Yeah, that's important. We'll add that also.
Yeah, I would also suggest that that everything is on the chopping block, everything,
Right.
and it's the question. It really is the percentage of defense versus non-defense cuts that we're going to be facing, and I think the message that we were getting from the White House is that what we're really trying to do on the defensive strategy is to insist that there is a balance between defense and non-defense spending and cuts, and so that it doesn't tip where everything gets cut 20-30% in non-defense and then the military gets everything. So just know what the cuts are. It's everything, and then what you need to figure out is at the local level, what resources do you really need to push your project forward and make the case for that, so that maybe across all the sites it comes, one thing comes up more importantly than another. DOE funding for, energy retrofits or, some kind of workforce program. So, yeah, I would say again, starting from the bottom up and figuring out what you really would like to have to be successful is going to be the best strategy. And why? Because in the way you said it, Steve, you've got some successes, and what it takes for you to, to tip the scale makes a very strong case. And so give me this, give me that, because I can give you if you give me that, I can prove where this could go.
Mm-hmm.
This is Casey. Just a quick question. How have things gone in your discussions with HUD about trying to remove some process barriers? Is there any update on that?
Oh, you're talking to me, Casey?
Yeah. I just remember a few months ago you were working with HUD on some of those sort of administrative barriers to getting access to the funds and using them.
Right. So we're pretty close post-election in terms of signing a memorandum of understanding to address three issues. One is Section 30, which is really the section of the HUD Act that really has a lot of regulations in terms of how housing authorities can dedicate money to do retrofitting of their properties. The next section is Section 3, which addresses hiring public housing and low-income residents in pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship. And the third, of course, is supporting the President's executive order to promote project labor agreements. So we're pretty close to having an MOU, this memorandum, that would set up a working group that would look at these three tracks, PLAs, Section 3, hiring, low-income residents, and then flexibility with housing authorities spending down their dollars and leveraging their dollars to do retrofitting. We've been involved with the process since March, and we feel pretty good about the level of HUD's participation to try to limit the bureaucracy. So at one time, just on one aspect, public housing authorities, if you put forth a deal, it took an average of 2 years from when you submitted the deal to when it was accepted and the proposal would go through. Now we believe we have it down to about a year, and that's because HUD, in our meetings, they cut down the number of people that need to sign off on something from 12 to 4. The barrier was often regional directors, and now there's a special center that just deals with regional directors, especially around energy efficient contracts. So, and then there's a waiver on how the Housing Authority can use part of their annual contribution contract, their ACC. So without even doing stuff regulatorily and setting up the working group, we've cut into the bureaucracy, but we want it to be more and more proactive and more cutting edge. So, I mean, that's not legislation, that's not changing a regulation, and it's basically revenue neutral because it's providing flexibility with dollars that already exist. So, you know, ideas like that will make all the difference.
That's great, Felipe, and also helpful because, you know, as Steve mentioned, a lot of, you know, in our Empower multifamily pilot has been really slowed down because of just the contracting for the HUD dollars. So those are the types of barriers that I imagine people will mention when we get into the nitty-gritty. Right.
And another point on that, Felipe, is that the way I understand public housing authorities work is that they're allowed to freeze, you know, the rate at which their utility rate over 20 years, and that means that they still get that same amount from HUD for their energy or utility bills, but they're making a saving on it, so it really financially pencils out into a good deal. And if we could replicate that mechanism in multifamily housing, it would be a huge sort of barrier removed because that's something the utilities don't enable. So that's good to hear, and also I'd be curious to hear if a national public housing initiative is imminent to be launched.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we hope to do that right after we sign the MOU with Secretary Donovan. You know, and again, the MOU, I mean, HUD has an MOU with the Girl Scouts. It's not around having the MOU, it's around having a working group.
Sure.
So you can have, you know, our different board members at the table with HUD on a monthly basis. You know, otherwise, you know, progress will be very, very slow. So the working group is really the linchpin in terms of moving forward with a national public housing and then hopefully a multifamily affordable housing initiative.
I know that would help hugely in our local housing authority discussions if that were in place.
I might mention that, and I'm not sure, Felipe, what the timing on this might be to be helpful for the local council directors, but we are also asking our Policy and Government Affairs Committee of the board to, which is represented by the policy directors of all of our board members, to identify what their policy priorities are. And we've identified some of it's been sort of passed on to us by our friends on the Hill and other places, but QECB, because we may end up losing QECBs. We obviously are backing prevention of job training cuts. There's a couple of other issues that we will be quarterbacking, but we will also be identifying those hot button issues for our board members that are representing out of industry and labor and community, and can present them to you as some of the other levels of concerns that we want addressed in the administration. But we do feel, and I think the PGA our co-chairs, which sort of Angela Blackwell and Ruben and Dana Cunningham, are very clear that we really want your voices lifted up versus having, the national folks pushing down policies on top of, on your efforts.
Mhm. So Felipe and everyone who's on the call, I think what I've taken from this that I'm going to do, unless you tell me otherwise, is I will repurpose this template and our conversation into a text document that will reflect, I think, the approach you guys want to take a bit more, which will be to do a bit more storytelling up front about key cases that you've worked on. And then below that, I'll ask these sorts of topics in question form that will allow you to use those cases then to just describe, for example, how you've stimulated demand, challenges you faced in doing so, what remains to be done, and where there are opportunities. And I'll add maybe a couple more topics in there that you can choose to look at or not with your councils. And then at the end, I'll also include a kind of basic framework for you guys to fill in, a sort of stakeholder template where you can start to connect specific policy or program issues to those different areas, whether it's labor or academic institutions or et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, Felipe will include this laundry list from ECC. But in the interim period, between now and when you meet with the councils, if any of you do have questions on those specific policy items, let myself and Felipe know, and I'll certainly do what I can to provide more information.
Just a comment, when we do this storytelling or case studies, whatever, I think it might be helpful to local councils to sort of take some of the roles that you identified, government, and we should probably break it out, federal, state, local,
sure,
academic institutions, labor, training organizations, and so on, and look at how, maybe the format we can use is how each of those has influenced or is engaged in it, what barriers exist and what you suggest happening moving forward. So I think one of the things we're hoping to do, the discussions we've had here, is not just to use this to inform the federal debate, but we're going to have a new governor and other local changes as well. So we see this as an opportunity to look at all of our initiatives going forward and say, how do we need to sort of recalibrate and bring elected officials and others up to speed so that we can maintain our momentum and improve our delivery.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Thank you. And also, Felipe, if you agree, then I think what's best is I'll try to send this out relatively quickly so that you all can send me any last questions. But I think if there aren't any further, problems, you should use the template and tweak it, as you see fit. For example, if I leave out a key stakeholder group that's particularly relevant in your case, add it on your own. And then after your meetings mid-month, I can collect material in whatever form it's in, if it's written or if you had a recorded conversation or if they're meeting minutes. And then I can work with you all and Felipe to start to try to distill that into a more presentable document.
If I could add one last thing, just to complicate your thinking, but hopefully maybe simplify it later. There's another piece of work that we're working on nationally, and we're going to be asking all the local council directors to spend a day with us in December thinking about, and that's sort of organizational assessments. How do we measure success? We're working with a consultant on developing rubrics and metrics. So for our three primary objectives, green our cities, build our communities, and strengthen our democracy. We're starting to unpack that in a way that not only defines the measures in each of these, but the roles of all of our partners in each of those major categories. So the role of government, industry, community, and labor in fulfilling those obligations. So we have a very rough draft of the rubric, which we spent about 2 days on. We hope to clean it up a little bit between now and when you come in December, to begin to have you take a run at it, as well as our board. But maybe I could just throw that out to you, Rosie, as
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, because it does also, it integrates all of this,
Right.
in a way that might be leading us down one path ultimately.
Definitely. Well, especially if this is something that you all will use locally, then it's probably worth combining efforts earlier rather than later.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's all I have, Felipe.
Great. So, just do folks have other comments?
Felipe, I had a quick question about the November 15th event press release. Basically, I'd love to know a little bit more about what message each of our mayors is receiving from the White House and the National Council or Conference of Mayors, and whether it's Emerald City specific, so that we can kind of cater our message so that it aligns with theirs.
So they're both the White House and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, they're talking off the script from the National Skills Alliance, and you have those SOS, Save Our Skills, the talking points. So, I mean, it's Emerald Cities as a supporter, but it's really around the talking points that Rachel shared with you last month during our virtual learning webinar, and additionally, in terms of what we sent out. So it isn't. They're going to be very general. They're just going to stress, we do not want deep cuts in federal job training programs, and so we're urging you the same way you tell your members not to cut the community development block grant program any further, to keep these programs intact, or if there are cuts, which are imminent, that it isn't up to 20%. So it's going to be very, very general. It's going to be more, to make your ask a little easier. So the White House was planning to make the calls on Friday, and so was the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So you could wait till next week, and you may want to wait till Monday to make those calls. I don't know if Chanel, if you're still on, you already had a response from Mayor Frank Jackson's office.
Yeah, so I just took the email that Felipe sent and reformatted it and sent it to the mayor's office, and just waiting to hear back from them. But I'm hopeful that they will integrate this into some press event or something they already have planned for that day.
But, they were initially open. So, I mean, what's interesting is, it's just the mayor. You want that relationship. You want it one-on-one. And this is one way to get engaged. We're not asking them for anything. It's revenue neutral. And, again, it could be a press event. It could be the mayor speaking. Like if the mayor has 6 or 7 events during that day, that he or she just winds this item into the event, or takes a break and makes the statement, or would do an editorial board or ed-op piece with the press, or just send the editor a note or talk to the editor saying this is very important in terms of saving our federal job training programs.
So, Felipe, how do you suggest that the local councils, what role they play? One, they pick up the phone and say, Mr. Mayor or Mr. Mayor's Chief of Staff, Emerald Cities is supporting this issue, and then what?
And then, say based on, we're not here to create any more work or heavy lifting. We're not asking you to do a special event unless you want to. But sometime during the day on November 15th, recognize the importance of federal job training programs. So that could take, a sidebar statement when the mayor appears at some ribbon cutting, just to add this, and or contacting the press. So again, we're not asking for you to organize a separate event at City Hall.
But does he have to say Emerald Cities, or is that we're just doing behind the scenes advocacy on this work?
It would be great that, Emerald Cities, Portland, if it's mentioned, but at the end of the day, we're part of a larger coalition with the Blue-Green Alliance, Green for All, the National Skills Coalition. And some of those folks who have people on the ground in your cities may be contacting you. And if they do, they can put in a call also to the mayor.
So it might also be that if the other coalition members come together, that they could actually show up with the mayor at a press event in support of this?
At a press event and or at an event where, the mayor is doing a ribbon cutting and then can point to Emerald Cities or the coalition and say, we have people that are concerned here, Emerald Cities, Blue-Green Alliance, National Skills Alliance, and it's an important issue not to cut these programs. And again, it's not to craft something differently, but to make the mayor feel comfortable. And then this is just one of many issues on how we want you to work one-on-one with your mayors.
And with Los Angeles, is it meant to go through Mark Ridley Thomas, the county supervisor? Because
actually, Lizette, it actually is going to the mayor.
It is.
Antonio Villaraigosa, and so, which I think is fine. You have a relationship with those guys, and I guess Larry Frank and all those guys that, their budgets are really majorly impacted, and their ability to deliver jobs for youth and for other dislocated populations is really being dependent on these funds. So anybody that's in the mayor's office that pushes economic and workforce development should really see their self-interest in this. Okay. And so I think what you can offer the mayor is, a partnership in the messaging. And maybe Felipe, if I'm not sure who in the coalition has relationships in LA, but or any of these cities, but if we could find the names of the people that could be a part of, the support group, that would be great in each city.
Yeah, and they have, so the other members of our national coalition have your email addresses. I told them not to initiate any contact till November 1st, so that we would have this conversation first, so you're not blindsided, that if someone who runs a local Strive or Job Corps Center contacts you, that you're not blindsided by it. Okay. So they'll give you intel and let you know. But at the end of the day, don't call the mayor on his private cell phone line, which I know you all have. But start with the chief of staff or deputy chief of staff, and just work in a conversation with them. And again, the SOS, Saving Our Skills talking points, is the format for that conversation.
And you each have your own coalitions. You don't have to rely on the national coalitions, but whoever your partners are locally, truly engage them in this if you'd like.
All right, I guess I guess that's it. So we'll thank everybody for joining, and Rosie will send, I guess, Rosie, if you can just send that information to me, and I'll make sure that it gets to everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. When I send out Rosie's information, I'll also send out the video link to this recording so that you can share it with your local councils if you need to.
Great. Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.